We're told that there are only two things that are certain in life: death and taxes. Today, let's talk about one of those things, and that is taxes. But not just any tax, but tax involving multinational companies. For years, these companies have been able to skate by not paying the amount in taxes that they should in certain situations. But this is coming to an end with a new agreement. 132 countries and jurisdictions representing more than 90% of global GDP have come together, led by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, to establish a new framework for international taxation. The two-pillar package aims to ensure that large multinational enterprises pay tax where they operate and earn profits, while adding much-needed certainty and stability to the international tax system. The pillars will provide much-needed support to governments needing to raise necessary revenue to repair their budgets and their balance sheets, while investing in essential public services, infrastructure, and the measures necessary to help optimize the strength and quality of the post-COVID-19 recovery. Companies like Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple would be taxed at a rate of at least 15% once the deal is implemented. The new tax regime is expected to add some $150 billion to government coffers globally, depending on who you ask. But not everyone is on board. 8 countries abstain from signing the pact for their own reasons. They include Estonia, Hungary, Ireland, Barbados, Sri Lanka, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and here on the continent, Nigeria and Kenya, 2 of the large economic powerhouses, have refused to sign. Today, we're looking at how the OECD is leading global tax reform and what it means for developing countries like here on the continent. I'm Tolulope Adeleru Balogun. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Joining me from the southwest of France is one of the principal architects of the new reform, Pascal Saint-Amans. He is the director of the Center for Tax Policy and Administration at the OECD. Pascal, thank you so much for joining us on Business Edge, and welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
So this particular pact, which is being led by the OECD, is about a decade, if not more, in the making. And many people say it comes with the recognition that the world's current global tax system is no longer fit for purpose. So what was the problem with how multinationals had been taxed or had been paying taxes up to now?
Well, the problem is that they have not been paying much taxes. And that has been the problem for the past 30 years. I say, you've had globalization without any form of tax regulation. And as a result, tax havens just won it all. All the money of multinational companies, what we call the intangible profit, the profit made out of the premium of the brands or the intellectual property on pharmaceutical, but also on digital companies, has shifted to tax havens or to low tax jurisdiction. On the African continent, Mauritius, in Europe, you have Switzerland or Ireland and a few other countries, in Asia, Singapore, and these countries have accumulated a lot of profit, which means that countries like Nigeria or South Africa or Egypt or Kenya, to talk about Africa, but we could name the US or France or Germany or any other large countries with high taxes, have lost a lot. And what we've tried to do for the past 10 years is, one, put an end to bank secrecy. It's more for the individuals, the high net worth individual who can no longer hide their money in Switzerland or elsewhere. And then we tried to attack the way multinational companies were taxed. That was a big project. And this project is now being finalized with this package, which now has to be finalized by October, and which will ensure that companies pay at least 15% of effective tax rate wherever they operate, which is a way to wipe out tax havens and make sure that there is a fair share. And final point is that large multinational companies, including and foremost digital companies, will leave a bigger share of their profits in the market jurisdictions like Nigeria.
Okay, so we will get to that 15% because it's been a sticking point for countries like Nigeria and Kenya. But let's look at Pillar 1. So under Pillar 1, taxing rights on more than $100 billion of profit are expected to be reallocated to market jurisdictions each year. Unfortunately, there are actually relatively few companies that probably make over $100 billion in profit, and there'll be a few companies that may be taxed under this pillar. Most countries, particularly low-income countries like many in Africa, would be unlikely to recoup the revenue they may lose from existing or possible digital services taxes. Now, one of the conditions under Pillar 1 is also that countries can only gain access to the new distribution of taxing rights by removing all existing unilateral taxes on tech companies. So some countries are very much a bit anxious and, let's say, maybe unsettled about this particular aspect of Pillar 1, and they may be reluctant to do so. Is there a compromise to be found? Yes, it's 10 years in the making for us to get to this historic global pact, but there are still some concerns, especially countries like Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, countries around the continent that are thinking of bringing in digital service taxes and how much money we can make for that, as opposed to companies relatively few and getting a share from that 100 billion profit and above.
You're right that there are only a few companies, probably 100 companies for the time being. But actually, these companies make most of the profits of multinational companies in the world. You have around 8,000 large multinational companies in the world, above $750 million of turnover. But the top 100 are those making probably more than half of the profit. So it's a small number of companies, but that's where the money is. Google, Facebook, IBM, and a few others, big names that we all know. Amazon, I can see for the cloud. So you have few companies, but a lot of profit. Now, what's the alternative? Because you're absolutely right to say that some countries, very few countries, and there are actually only 6 countries left because Barbados recently joined, as well as St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So we're left with only 6 countries, 2 of them being African countries. So they say, well, we will not get as much as we could from a digital service tax, a tax on the transactions from digital companies. The problem here is that it's not a simple choice like this, because if you go for a digital service tax, who's going to pay it? The consumers, the Nigerians. It's not Google who's going to pay it. Google is going to pass on the 3 or 5% tax on transactions to Nigerian people, and that's not fair. So you have the choice between a tax on Google that Google will pay, maybe a bit less, than a transaction tax, which will be borne by the people in Nigeria. And the second dimension to the equation is the fact that the US does not like unilateral measures targeted to companies. Mm-hmm. And if you move to a digital service tax, you are going to face trade sanctions. So the choice is between a tax which may yield more revenue, but this revenue will be paid by Nigerian people together with trade sanctions from the US, or a solution which is agreed already by 133 countries, which will bring money, which will bring tax peace, and which will be borne by the companies and not by the people. And that's why South Africa, Egypt, and many others, I don't know, 15 African countries at least, have joined the agreement together with the other 100 plus countries which are members of this inclusive framework.
All right, so let's talk about 15%. That seems to be a big sore point. So 15% is the minimum corporate tax rate that the OECD has agreed with the countries and the jurisdictions. But here on the continent, the corporate tax rates ranges from 15% to 35%. Nigeria and Kenya have a 30% corporate tax rate, and that's why they have abstained. They said that in signing this agreement, they're going to be making less in corporate taxes than they would, and that might affect their abilities to finance their budget deficits, to put in programs for poverty alleviation and infrastructure. What's your response to those? Because it's not just Nigeria and Kenya. They also have some other countries as well, and criticism that says 15% is not enough, that it was not ambitious enough on the part of the OECD to get to that 15% minimum.
That's kind of a fair remark. However, the benchmark is not 30%, which is the corporate income tax rate in Kenya or Nigeria, and 15%, because then you would say, well, why would we lower corporate income tax? The benchmark is between what foreign multinational companies currently pay in Nigeria. How much do they pay? Close to zero. So the idea here is to put in place a safety net to make sure that the profit derived from Nigeria or from any other African countries or any country in the world, which go to another country where the multinational company is headquartered, that these profits are taxed, that they are not shifted to a tax haven or a low tax jurisdiction, which is the case today. So our solution is to make sure that instead of zero, you have 15, which will be additional resources. It has nothing to do with the 30% corporate income tax of Nigeria. On the contrary, it supports the fact that a country like Nigeria, which needs to mobilize domestic resources, needs a high level of corporate income tax. With today the risk that it could be zero, that undermines the ability of having a high domestic rate. Tomorrow, you can further have a high domestic rate because we will secure that there is no profit shifting from multinational companies. So here, I fear there is a misunderstanding. And I would like to prove my case by saying that the three remaining countries outside Nigeria, Sri Lanka, and Kenya, which don't join the agreement, are Hungary, Estonia, and Ireland, precisely because they think that 15% is much too high. Yes. So the low tax jurisdictions hate the 15%.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that, as they said, the 15% takes away their competitive advantage. We've heard that as well, particularly from Ireland. But I want to follow up on something you said in terms of this 15% and how the need is there for us to come to the conversation or the meeting table. Again, I'll stress, this is 10 years in the making. We've known for at least maybe 2 or 3 years now that 15% was going to be the final figure. Barbados has signed on, so it's now 133 countries. Are there any ongoing conversations between representatives of Nigeria and Kenya in terms of getting them, I guess I would say, to go along with the global pact on this? Because it is going to be quite important that you have Nigeria and Kenya sign up. The biggest economy on the continent, and I do believe the biggest economy in East Africa as well, and one of the top 5 economies on the continent, are abstaining. So are there ongoing conversations to bring them to the table?
Yes, absolutely. And the first thing I would like to say is that Nigeria, as well as Kenya and the other African countries, have been part of the negotiation. So it's not an OECD negotiation. It's not, the rich man's club negotiation, which would tell Africans, oh, now you join, you just signed on. This process has been negotiated through what we call an inclusive framework with 139 countries on an equal footing. And I can add that the Nigerian delegate, Matthew, is outstanding, has been extremely good, extremely invested. So we fully respect the decision of Nigeria not to join. That said, it's a minority position, and asking for more is fine, but at some point you also need to compromise. So yes, we are in touch with Nigeria and Kenya, as well as Sri Lanka and the 3 others which have not joined. And we really hope that they can join because they will benefit from this agreement. And I can tell you that you have contributed to shape the agreement. There are many aspects, and this is too technical, I think, for your audience, but we could talk about subject to tax or different quantums. But all these have been influenced heavily, in particular by Nigeria. So you got a lot. And at some point, you need to finalize a negotiation and to decide whether it's a good deal or not. It's never a perfect deal for anyone. Everybody has to be reasonably happy and reasonably unhappy. So we think that Nigeria should now be reasonably unhappy, but also reasonably happy to join the agreement. So we're in touch with them. And it's very important that all African countries join and that they continue shaping the agreement and the ongoing discussion which will take place. It's very important. Global problems need global solutions, and global solutions should include all countries, in particular the key economies from Africa.
All right, Pascal, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk a bit more about the digital economy, as he referred to it. A large number of digital tech companies are going to be feeling, I guess we would say, the brunt of this particular pact when it comes into effect. And 23 African countries have signed on. What really is in it for the continent to sign on to this global pact? You're watching Business Edge. Do stay with us. There is more right after this. Still with me is Pascal Santaman, the Director of the Center for Tax Policy and Administration of the OECD. Pascal, a number of African countries have expanded the scope of their indirect taxes to cover digital services, but only a few so far have implemented some form of direct digital services tax that applies to non-residents with no physical presence in their respective countries. Now, one of the reasons cited by African governments is they have been waiting for the OECD. I know there's a number of conversations and work that the OECD has been doing towards the digital economy and how that should be taxed. But with this framework, is there going to be a separate conversation ongoing now about the digital economy, or is this what we should expect to sort of cover that in the coming years?
So first, you're absolutely right to say that a number of countries have introduced indirect tax. It's value-added taxes. And that's where the money is. And there is a lot of money which is being yielded from these indirect taxes. South Africa and many others have done that. And I would encourage all the countries to look into that. Second, countries have been frustrated for the past 10 years, 20 years, I would even say, by the fact that large digital companies are able to do a lot of business from Nigeria without even being physically present in Nigeria. And therefore, they don't have any tax liability in Nigeria. And without a global agreement, countries cannot do anything to take the profit. So the only alternative they had was value-added taxes, and they have not done it enough, I would say, or adding a transaction tax. But the transaction tax, as I said earlier, is to be borne by the people because it will be passed on to the people and not paid by the company. So the solution, which we strongly believe in, is this global agreement, which provides for the fact that a company will be taxable in a country even if it is not physically present. That's what we call a new nexus. So Google or Facebook or whatever other digital company will now be taxable in Nigeria, whether it's physically present or not in Nigeria. And if it sells more than 1 million euros of services or goods in Nigeria, a percentage of its global profit will be allocated to Nigeria in a very simple manner. And that's the solution which is on the table and which will finally allow countries to get their fair share on the profits of digital companies, but not only on digital companies. There is no reason that French luxury companies like Louis Vuitton, for instance, wouldn't leave more money to Nigeria when you buy handbags from Louis Vuitton or other goods from luxury companies or pharmaceutical companies, which are making huge profits and probably, even though they may be physically present, will not leave much profit because they will put the intellectual property in Ireland or in Singapore or in Mauritius. And that's what we want to change.
All right, it's a good thing you mentioned Mauritius. So 23 countries, African nations that is, are supporting this agreement, including Mauritius and Seychelles that have long faced scrutiny for their international tax avoidance policies. South Africa is also on board, and so is Tunisia, along with Senegal and some West African nations. But you also have an organization like the African Tax Administration Forum, and they say that there's still further work that needs to be done to finalize the new rules and ensure a more equitable tax allocation to also help stem illicit financial flows from Africa as well and ensure that everything works and everyone benefits. What would you say to them? Because you've mentioned if you make 1 million euros in profit, that there'll be some kind of reallocation. What's the formula for that? How are we sure this formula is going to be equitable for low-income countries like Nigeria, like Kenya, like South Africa, like Tunisia? Take us through that.
Absolutely. So the idea, and I can tell you, we work very closely with the African Tax Administration Forum, which is around the table and provides great support to African countries among Africans to come up to the inclusive framework with strong positions, which again have had an influence on the discussion. Let's start with a concrete example. When we started the conversation, a number of countries, the US, Germany, France, the UK, and others, large countries, India as well, said, well, I mean, we'll have the new nexus, what triggers the new taxing right, only when the sales or the services provided are above 5 million. And African countries, ATAF in particular, said, no, 5 million is much too high. It should be 1 million. And we end up with 1 million. And if you're a small country, 250,000 euros of sales will trigger the taxing right. Now, when a company is taxable on the territory because of this new nexus, we will take a percentage to be decided by the end of October between 20 and 30% of the residual profit of the company, of the premium, the big profit of the company will be allocated to all economies, and it depends on the percentage of the sales in the economy. So it is true that if you're a small or a developing economy, in percentages, you will get less than a large economy like India or China or the US. But in terms of percentage of your revenue, it will be more because countries like Nigeria or other African countries have large corporate income tax. So it is true that in absolute numbers, there is not that much going to Africa, but in relative numbers, it's significant. And that initiates a fundamental change towards a more balanced international tax framework. You know, the current international tax framework was developed in 1928 at the time of colonial powers without African countries around the table. Now we're shifting and we're very happy to have all the countries across the world as part of the conversation so that you have a more balanced approach. It's a start, but you need to start with something. And that is, as you said in your presentation, a historic change which is being agreed.
All right, so very quickly, because time is never enough when we get into these conversations. The timeline is that the framework should be finalized in October, a multilateral agreement to be developed and open for signatures for 2023, and for it to be fully enforced by, 2022, then fully enforced by 2023. Is this timeline still going to be held? Are we on course for this?
Yes, we are, and we must. It also depends a bit on the US tax reform. You know that the US, the president of the US, President Biden, has decided that to reconcile the middle class with globalization, there was a need for the large multinational companies to pay a fairer share of tax on their profits. So they want to do the tax reform. So we hope that the US tax reform will happen before year end, and that all the rest, which is linked to the US tax reform, given the size of the US economy, all the rest will be implemented in 2023. There is an urgency. What is at stake is kind of tax peace or trade peace. If we don't have an agreement, countries will be at a tax war and everybody will lose out of that, starting with the small developing countries, which should be part of this global solution. So yes, we're on track. And the next step, as you said, is to finalize the agreement by the end of October. And I really wish that Nigeria and Kenya will join South Africa, will join Egypt, will join Morocco, or Tunisia and other African, Senegal, Ivory Coast, Zambia, and many other African countries who have decided that the deal is to be improved, but still good enough to be joined.
All right, Pascal, we'll end the conversation there, but I'm very sure it'll be an ongoing one. And we look forward to speaking with you again as new developments come up with this. And I guess I would say congratulations, a very historic work. You're one of the principal architects, and we'll see how all of this plays out in the coming years. Thank you so much for joining me on Business Edge.
Thank you so much. Thanks to you. Bye-bye.
All right. And it is a conversation that will be continuing. As he said, Nigeria and Kenya, two of the largest economies on the continent, are still holding out. But there are some explanations and there are conversations ongoing to bring them onto this global pact. 132 countries and jurisdictions, 90% of global GDP represented, on board with the OECD to change taxation around the world. You're watching Business Edge. When we come back, NC4 to watch is what we use to wrap up. Stay with me. And as we wrap things up, we start in West Africa, where Ghana's Auditor General Johnson Akuamo Asiedu has accused 28 oil marketing companies for their failure to pay petroleum taxes on fuel lifted between July 2018 and December 2019. Now, the taxes totaled 226.94 million Ghana cedis. The AGA has charged the Commissioner, Customs Division of the Ghana Revenue Authority to recover the amount from these companies without any further delay. In the East, the Kenya Revenue Authority's tax collection for July reached 121.8 billion Kenyan shillings compared to 94.4 billion over a similar period last year. A statement on revenue and expenditure from the National Treasury shows that revenue totaled 122.28 billion Kenyan shillings, comprising of tax revenue of 121.88 billion and non-tax revenue of 348.9 million. Number 3 on our list takes us to the southern part of the continent, where the South African government has proposed amendments to the tax legislation that could have significant implications for pension fund members who want to take their savings offshore. The National Treasury proposal could allow the South African Revenue Service to subject the interest in retirement funds to taxation when an individual ceases to be a South African tax resident. And we wrap things up right back here in West Africa, where Nigeria's Consumer Price Index, which measures inflation, dropped to 17.38% year-on-year in July, compared to 17.75% in the preceding month, according to the National Bureau of Statistics. The NBS says that the 0.37% reduction in the headline index implied that prices continued to rise in July, but at a slower rate than they did in June. And that's all we have for you on this edition of Business Edge. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube and subscribe to our channel so you can, of course, watch any of the editions of the show that you've missed. You can download our mobile app, and you can, of course, also follow us on our social media platforms. I'm Tolulope Adeleru Balogun. I'll be back 11 a.m. West African time for more business, financial, and economic news from the continent and that concerns the continent, because we put Africa first. Have a good one.